start off with where we left last time. So we'll basically this lecture and next lecture, right? We'll be talking about learning theory. So last time we were just building up. We spoke about briefly kind of the notion of the true error, right? The true error is what we want to bound, and then I kind of gave a brief idea of what will be the so we spoke briefly about the idea of consistent learners, right? So we are assuming that the hypothesis space is finite, the true distribution of the data is given, so there's no noisy labels, and the learner is consistent, right? So that means that it always outputs a perfect classifier. So that means that the training error is zero. So perfect classifier means, sorry. Okay. Yeah, so the perfect classifier means the training error is equal to zero, right? And we briefly saw, so I'll just recap this one last thing. So we saw this notion of probably approximately correct, which is called PAC, right? So this is PAC learning, this is a PAC learning setting. So essentially in PAC learning, there are two main parameters. One is epsilon. Epsilon is the bound on the true error, right? And delta is the probability with which this bound holds, right? So essentially what we want to say is that with fairly high probability, right? So with probability 1 minus delta, where delta is close to 0, we have a true error of at most epsilon. Again, epsilon is close to 0, right? And the question is, given this, what is the minimum number of samples that are required to achieve this, right? And in this PAC learning setting, we will start with this much simpler scenario where the training error is 0. So if the training error is exactly 0, then we want to ask that in the case of a finite hypothesis space, what is the generalization bound we can get, right? So in particular, we can frame this in two ways, right? We can ask that what is the bound on the generalization error, on the test error, right? Given the number of samples and the size of the hypothesis and so on and so forth, right? Or we can also ask the question as to what is the minimum number of samples, number of training samples that you require so that we can get a test error of less than equal to epsilon. Right? And I think fundamental to all of this is the fact that the training and the test data are drawn from the same distribution. So because the training and the test data are drawn from the same distribution, inherently what will happen is that there will just be one distribution from which both of these data points are drawn, right? So given enough number of training samples, a low training error should also imply a low test error, right? So this is the main intuition. Okay, so we'll just build upon this a little bit more. So we'll say that the version space, which is a set of consistent hypotheses, is said to be epsilon exhausted. Okay, so this is one more quantity that we'll consider here, which is a notion of being epsilon exhausted. And we say that a version space, which is a set of all consistent hypotheses, again, consistent hypothesis means hypothesis such that the training error of the hypothesis is equal to zero, right? So given such consistent hypothesis, we say that this is epsilon exhausted if and only every consistent hypothesis has a true error less than epsilon. Okay. So the idea is we want enough samples to guarantee that every consistent hypothesis has at most an error of epsilon. So there could be several hypotheses which are consistent, right? So like we saw in the case of perceptron, for example, right? Where you have basically linearly separable data, right? So if you have linearly separable data, then there are actually multiple decision boundaries which can separate the linearly separable data, right? So each of these are like perfect classifiers or consistent hypothesis. And the idea is that given every such consistent hypothesis, we want that every such consistent hypothesis should have an error at most epsilon. So basically another way of kind of writing this is that the worst case error of every consistent hypothesis is essentially at most epsilon. So it's less than equal to epsilon. Okay. So this is something to keep in mind that this is going to be the goal, right? So we're going to set up the math so that we can do this. So the idea is as follows: let x1, y1 until xn, ym be m labeled data points sampled independently according to p, right? And let ch of m be a random variable which indicates whether or not the mth data point is correctly classified. Okay, so essentially what this means is that we have a set of random variables ch1 until chm, right, where m is the number of training data points. Okay, so all of these are random variables. So now these random variables basically take values 1 or 0, right? 0, it takes the value 0 if the mth data point is correctly classified, and it takes the value 1 sorry, it takes the value 1 if it is correctly classified, and takes the value 0 if it is incorrectly classified, right? So this basically takes values which is either 0 or 1. Okay, so now the question is, how do we, what is the probability, right? So what is, given this distribution P, what is the probability that ch of m is equal to 0? So this probability is nothing but the sum over xy, pxy multiplied by the indicator that hx is not equal to y. Right? So so basically you take a you basically have this distribution, you have the true distribution P, right? And over your entire true distribution, you see that for this given hypothesis H, what is this error, right? So this term is nothing but epsilon of H, which is the error, of actually getting um, an error, which is the true error of hypothesis H, right? So this term over here, right? So this term is the probability that a randomly sampled pair XY is incorrectly classified by H, right? And this term is the true error of hypothesis H, right? So essentially what this means is that for each of these random variables, CH1 to CHM, P of CHM I equal to 0 is equal to epsilon H. So the probability basically are the same. So essentially the probability of this being 0 is epsilon H, the probability of this being 1 is 1 minus epsilon H, right? So, well, given this, we can ask the following, right? So what is the probability that all the data points are correctly classified? So the probability that ch1 equal to 1 until chm equal to 1, right, is equal to 1 is equal to 1 minus epsilon h raised to m. Okay, so essentially this is the probability that my entire training data is correctly classified, right? So this is the probability that hypothesis H is consistent, right? So now the probability that a hypothesis H whose true error is at least epsilon correctly classifies the m data points, right? So if this bound is at least epsilon, then and so essentially what we are saying is that the P of ch of I equal to 0 is, say, greater than equal to epsilon, right? So if the true error is greater than equal to epsilon, or is at least epsilon, then the probability that the that ch1 equal to 1 until chm equal to 1 is bounded by 1 minus epsilon raised to m, right? Which actually is bounded by e raised to minus epsilon m. So essentially the reason for this is because 1 minus epsilon, right, when epsilon is small particularly, 1 minus epsilon is actually bounded by e raised to minus epsilon. So actually this bound holds everywhere, that 1 minus epsilon is less than equal to e raised to minus epsilon, but this bound is closed when epsilon is small, right? So when epsilon is small, then 1 minus epsilon is approximately equal to e raised to minus epsilon. So the reason for this is e raised to x is approximately equal to 1 plus x. Okay, and otherwise e raised to x is actually greater than equal to 1 plus x. So given this, we can actually come up with this upper bound, which is e raised to minus epsilon m, right? So now we have the following probability. So we have the probability that the probability that the training data has a zero error, right? Or in other words, the hypothesis H is consistent is less than equal to e raised to minus epsilon m. Okay, so so far so good. Okay, so now what we'll do is the following. Okay, so we are going to come up with what is known as a union bound, and actually a lot of learning theory relies on this somewhat very simple but yet very powerful idea called the union bound. Okay, so the idea of the union bound is as follows. Let H bad, which is a subset of H, be the set of all hypotheses such that the true error is at least epsilon. So what this means is that for all H in H bad, right? So by the way, H here is the set of all consistent hypotheses. Okay. So for all H which are in H bad, what we have is that the true error epsilon H is actually less than equal to, or sorry, is greater than equal to epsilon. Okay, so that means that they actually have a true error larger than epsilon. And then what we know now from earlier is that for every hypothesis H in H bad, right, the probability that H correctly classifies all m data points is less than equal to e raised to minus epsilon m, right? So the probability that some H in H bad correctly classifies all of the data points. So that means that there exists at least one H in H bad, okay, which correctly classifies all the data points is essentially taking this union, right? So this is the union of H in H bad, right? Or this is an OR in some sense, right? So this is an OR operator that I have all of these events. So for every H, I have this event that CH1 equal to 1 until CHM equal to 1, right? And I take this union over all my bad hypotheses. Then because of the union bound, what the union bound says essentially, so I'll just write this down very quickly. Okay, so the union bound says the following. Okay, so I have a set of events, right? H in capital H. Okay, then now the probability, and if I take a union of H in capital H of event H, right? So this term is actually less than equal to the sum of H in capital H, right? And you have the probability of event H. Okay. So this is basically what the union bound is. So you take the union of a set of events. The probability of the union is less than equal to the sum of the probabilities. Okay. And this can actually be shown using basically elementary probability, right? I mean, I would encourage you guys to just take a quick look at probability, kind of basic probability, and try to show this. But basically, this will always hold for unions, right? So this is exactly this thing. So I have all of these events where this is basically event for a particular H, right? So this is my event H, and I take the union overall H in H bad. This is basically nothing but probability of event H, right? From a union bound. And this is in some sense less than equal to the size of H bad multiplied by e raised to minus epsilon m, right? Because each of these probabilities is bounded by e raised to minus epsilon m. Okay. And this in turn is bounded by the size of H multiplied by e raised to minus epsilon m, because H bad is a subset of H, right? So given the fact that my hypothesis is bounded, the set of all hypotheses is bounded, right? I know that my size of H is a finite quantity. Okay. So this is the main result. So the main result is for a finite hypothesis space H. So by the way, actually over here, it's not really required to take all consistent hypotheses because you could say, for example, H bad is a subset of all consistent hypotheses, which in turn is a subset of H, right? So if we know that the set of all hypotheses is bounded, that is actually sufficient for this argument. So essentially what this theorem says is, this is what we basically proved, right? So essentially what this says is that for a finite hypothesis space H with m IID samples and with 0 less than epsilon less than 1, the probability that the version space is not epsilon exhausted is at most the size of H multiplied by e raised to minus epsilon m. So just rephrasing this means something simpler. What this basically says is the following. So just kind of bear with me a little bit and just try to pay a little bit of attention on this theorem. This is the main result, and I'll just try to explain this a little bit, right? So given this finite hypothesis space H, right? So this is going to be finite with m IID samples. So we are given m training data points. This is like m training points, right? And I have a particular epsilon, which is between 0 to 1, right? The probability that there exists a hypothesis in H that is consistent with the data, but has a true error larger than epsilon is at most the size of H multiplied by e raised to minus epsilon m. Okay. So this essentially was what we were calling of being epsilon exhausted, right? So essentially what this means is that there exists a hypothesis H that is consistent with the data but has a true error larger than epsilon. So it is so essentially it's kind of a bad. Okay, so basically H bad, right? H bad was essentially bad from a generalization perspective. Right? So essentially what this is saying is that there exists at least one hypothesis that is consistent with the data. So that means that for a hypothesis H, the training error of H is equal to 0, right? So the training error of H is equal to 0, but still it is bad. Why is it bad? Because the true error of epsilon H is greater than or equal to epsilon, right? So that means that I pick any epsilon and the true error is larger than the epsilon, okay? So this probability is at most size of H multiplied by e raised to minus epsilon m. So essentially, intuitively, you can see that if size of H is bounded, right? If this is bounded, the larger that m gets, right? The higher the value of m, this is essentially exponential with m, right? So this is e raised to minus epsilon m. So the larger that m gets, the smaller this probability gets. So the smaller that this probability gets, what this means is that every hypothesis which is consistent with the data should have a true error which is less than or equal to epsilon. Because the converse probability, which is the probability that the true error, that there exists at least one hypothesis such that the true error is larger than epsilon, right, is at most this quantity, which is going down with m. So essentially, intuitively, what this means is that once m becomes very large, once you get more and more samples, right, if you are consistent with the data, you also will have a low true error, that is epsilon H or epsilon. Okay. So is everyone following with kind of following me until this point? Is this clear? Are there any questions? Okay. You guys can hear me, right? Are you guys able to hear me? Okay. Okay. So yeah, I think please send your questions on chat. I think my audio might still not be working. So please send your questions on chat if you have any questions. So essentially this can be now converted to a sample complexity, right? So what sample complexity essentially means is it's a bound on the number of training examples. So what's the minimum number of training examples I need in order to get a particular true error, right? So let delta be an upper bound on the desired probability, right? So essentially what this means is that this quantity is less than or equal to delta. Okay, so this is an upper bound on the probability. So the probability is that there exists a hypothesis H that is so at least one hypothesis H, small h in capital H, is consistent with the data that has a true error larger than epsilon, right? So conversely, what this means is that 1 minus delta is equal to the probability that every h in H that is consistent has true error less than equal to epsilon. Okay, so this is exactly what is called a high probability bound. Okay, and high probability bounds are in some sense the cornerstone of machine learning. Everywhere you will see, I mean, at least theoretical machine learning, right? Because everywhere you will very likely see some kind of a high probability bound, because you can never give this result with probability 1, right? Or with delta equal to 0, you will not be able to give this result. Right? And I think with this bound, you will see why. Because if you solve for m, right? And by the way, it's not very hard math to actually do this. So maybe I'll just do this very quickly. So what we have is that size of h multiplied by e raised to minus epsilon m is less than equal to delta, right? So what basically you can do is you take log on both sides. So you get log of size of h, right? Plus minus, so I think you take the log of e raised to minus epsilon m. This is minus epsilon m, right? This quantity is less than log delta. Sorry, log delta. Okay. Then what you do is that you get log delta on the left hand side and you get epsilon m on the right hand side, right? So what you get is that log size of h, right, minus log delta is less than equal to epsilon m, right? So what this implies is that m is greater than equal to 1 minus epsilon of log size of h minus log delta. Okay. Now note that delta is less than 1. So because delta is less than 1, you can in turn write this as 1 over epsilon log size of h plus log 1 over delta. Okay, so because delta is less than 1, 1 over delta will be some quantity larger than 1. So this is exactly what this bound is, right? So m is greater than equal to log of h plus log of 1 over delta divided by epsilon. So what this means is that if epsilon becomes 0 or if delta becomes 0, m becomes infinity, right? So this bound really only makes sense when delta and epsilon are not 0. But the nice thing is that you can make epsilon and delta arbitrarily small as long as they are not 0. Okay, you can make them arbitrarily small and you will get a corresponding m that satisfies this bound. Okay, so for example, maybe I might set epsilon to be 10 raised to minus 3. Okay, and I might set delta to be 10 raised to minus 6, right? So note that this depends on log of delta. So because it depends on log of delta, the factor of delta does not matter as much. Right? So if size of h is bounded by say some constant c, right? So say c is like 1000, for example, right? So if say or maybe I'll take size of h to be like 10 raised to 10, for example, right? So this is maybe a pretty large number, although it's not still not practical. We'll see why. I'll take a look at some issues with. I'll basically describe some issues with this. Okay, but for now, just assume these numbers, right? So then we get something like m is greater than equal to roughly 10 plus 6, which is 16, multiplied by 10 raised to 3, right? So this is basically 16 into 10 raised to 3. So that is the number of samples required if we have these numbers. So you can see that we can set various numbers of epsilon and delta. And as long as the number of hypotheses is fixed, we can actually get a sample complexity bound. Any questions until now? Are things clear? Okay, good. So if everything is clear, then one thing which is super critical, again, which is very reminiscent of all of learning theory, right? So this is typical in learning theory, right? is that this is a sufficient but not necessary condition. Okay, so what this means is that the union bound in practice is often quite loose. So in practice, you might not require as many samples, right? But nevertheless, you basically can't show anything better oftentimes, right? So this is somewhat of a pessimistic bound, but this is what we have from a theoretical perspective. But at least it's pretty awesome, right? It's pretty awesome that if we have this condition that the hypothesis space is bounded, we have a very neat result now that says that if I have a low training error, I can also guarantee a low testing error, right? And in some sense, the intuition of this is as follows: the smaller that size of H is, okay, the smaller is the complexity of the model, right? And lower the complexity of the model, the better will be the generalization. So essentially the gap between the training error and the testing error will be lower the complexity. So if the complexity of the model is enough to ensure training error is 0 or close to 0, I would also expect that the test error would be low. Okay, as long as the model is not too complex. So all right, so can someone tell me what are some issues with this complexity result in practice? For most machine learning models that we see in practice, what might be some issues with this? Any idea? So the issue is, as we'll see, is that even a very simple Boolean function with n Boolean features. Okay, so essentially the idea is as follows: I have um, I have essentially n features which basically are 0 or 1, right? So I have my data which basically is like say x1, x2 until xn, right? And each feature can take 0 or 1, right? And the y also takes 0 or 1, right? So it's a Boolean function. So given that my features are Boolean and my label also is Boolean, and consider that the decision space consists of all decision trees. Okay. So can someone tell me what is the size of this space? So in particular, what are the total number of maybe I just ask the question in the following way. Okay, so what are the total number of possible um, input values x1 until xn? Can someone tell me what are the total number of input values x1 to xn? How many possible inputs are there in this data set? 2 raised to n, exactly. So it's 2 raised to n, right? Now, if there are 2 raised to n possible inputs, what are the total number of possible hypothesis functions? What will be the total number of hypothesis functions? Recall that each hypothesis function takes either a value of 0 or 1, right? So for each input, we would take a value of 0 or 1. So what will be the total number of hypothesis functions? Anyone? Okay, so 2 raised to n plus 1. No, it's not 2 raised to n plus 1. It is actually 2 raised to 2 raised to n. So the reason is because there are 2 raised to n possible number of inputs. Okay, so that means that I have input 1, input 2 until input 2 raised to n, right? And for each input, I can take either a value of 0 or 1, right? So total number of possible functions for each input pair which takes a 0 or 1 is actually 2 raised to the total number of inputs, because for each input it can take 0 or 1, right? So 2 raised to number of inputs. And since the number of input values is 2 raised to n, this is 2 raised to 2 raised to n. So it's actually much larger than 2 raised to n or 2 raised to n plus 1. Okay, so this is the total number of Boolean functions, right? So the problem is immediately, as you can see, the sample complexity bound becomes crazy, right? Because I only have a log factor, but the total number of hypotheses is actually doubly exponential. So this is not just exponential, this is actually doubly exponential, right? So even for an extremely simple class of Boolean functions, okay, just think about this for a minute. This is a very, very simple class of Boolean functions. It's the simplest you can imagine, right? I mean, obviously, you would take significantly more values, possibly continuous values, right? The features can take continuous values. So the size of H becomes much more complicated. But even if you assume that we just take binary features, the total number of possible hypotheses that are possible on this data is 2 raised to 2 raised to n. So it is doubly exponential, right? So because we have a log, right? What this means is that m is actually greater than 2 raised to n plus log 1 over delta divided by epsilon, right? So this bound is actually very pessimistic. So almost, kind of almost immediately, we can see the problems with this with this bound. So I think this is the major issue, but at least on the bright side, there is at least some bound that you can show, right? I think over the years, many folks have tried to improve this, and now there's an entire subfield of machine learning dedicated to studying theoretical machine learning. In fact, there are conferences on theoretical machine learning, such as COLT, which is Conference on Learning Theory, and Algorithmic Learning Theory, ALT, right? So there are these two major conferences completely dedicated on studying learning theory bounds and learnability of functions. Okay, so this is pretty interesting. I think a pretty good, pretty nice field, kind of subfield of machine learning. Okay, so far we have looked at this very simple scenario, right, where we assume two things. One is that we assume that there's a perfect classifier, so the training error is equal to 0, right? So the first is how do we handle situations where the training error is greater than 0, right? Or basically you have non-zero training error. Can we extend this kind of simple generalization bound which we have here, right? Can we extend this to a scenario with where the training error is greater than 0, right? The second question is that what can we do if the hypothesis space is not finite, right? So in some sense, it's an infinite sample complexity. So of H is infinite. In fact, most models, right, like decision trees on real data, real features, right, or perceptron, SVMs, logistic regression, right, linear regression. I mean, almost every model would actually operate on this infinite hypothesis space, right? So I think the analysis we had right now is like very simplistic. So we will actually be looking at how to answer these two questions. So we'll start with the first one. And for the first one, we will actually use a very standard kind of bound kind of theoretical result that is important in the toolbox of statistical or learning theory folks. Okay, so this is called a Chernoff bound, which is actually a probabilistic bound, right? So we saw a version of Chernoff bound when we were looking at we were looking at like means and like MLE estimates and so on and so forth. At that time we saw a version of Chernoff bound. So it's the same bound. The idea is as follows. Suppose I have IID random variables y1 to yn, right? Taking values in 0 to 1. So it takes values either 0 or 1, right? So this is the label in some sense, okay? And the expected value over a probability distribution is small y, right? So the question is that if I have enough number of data points, basically enough, basically capital M is large enough, right? and I take the sum of this m from capital, 1 to capital M, right? And I take this difference, right? So I take the difference between y minus 1 over n of m equal to 1 to capital M of ym greater than epsilon. I want to bound this quantity. So this quantity turns out that is less than equal to 2 raised to, 2 multiplied by e raised to minus 2m epsilon square. Okay. So we can actually immediately apply this to our random variables, right? So we define the yi's, right? So define yi to be 1 minus ci of h, right? So recall that ci of h was taking a value 1 if data point I is correctly classified, right? And it takes the value 0 if it is incorrectly classified. So basically yi is the opposite. So yi is in some sense the error, right? So yi represents the error of item I, right? So the error is either 1 if it makes an error, or it's 0, right? So this quantity now is the sum of the errors on the training data, right? So can someone tell me what this term is exactly? 1 over m of sum of m1 minus chm. What is this term? Any idea? Zero one loss. It's not exactly the 0 1 loss, it is more of an error. But what error is it? It's a training error, exactly, right? So this is the training error because CH of M is the training error of item M. It's basically CHM was if um, the quantity that basically instance M in the training data is correctly classified, right? So 1 minus CHM is the quantity that says that this is the error, the error of instance M, right? So if you take a sum and you average it out, this is the average training error. Okay. So this very simple quantity now gives us the bound that we care about. Okay. So actually there is one small thing I'd like to point out. We use actually a slightly different bound. This is called the Hofding bound. I think this is the spelling. I might be incorrect with the spelling, but this is called the Hofding bound. And this actually is very related to a Chernow bound, except that this is one-sided. Okay, so we get rid of the absolute sign, and getting rid of the absolute sign, we get this quantity, we get this bound. So this bound basically says that this is epsilon h. Okay, so this is the true test error. Okay, or I'll just call this the test error. Okay, and this is the train error. Okay, so what this is saying is that the test error minus train error, the probability that the difference between the two errors is greater than epsilon should be less than e raised to minus 2m epsilon square. So as epsilon gets, as m gets large, this error must go down. Okay, so again, this is very intuitive. So we can get a very similar sample complexity bound using this kind of nice machinery, right? So for finite hypothesis space H, right, and m IID samples and an epsilon which is between 0 and 1, the probability that the true error of any of the best classifiers, that is the lowest training error, is larger than its training error plus epsilon, right? Sorry, no, this is not training error. This should be um, okay, so I think basically what this is saying here is that the best classifier is the one with the lowest training error. But basically what this says is that for any pair of or for any hypothesis, the difference between the training error and the test error, right? The probability that this term is actually larger than epsilon is smaller than size of h raised to multiplied by e raised to minus 2m epsilon square, right? So again, for sample complexity, we have this delta, right? So now 1 minus delta exactly refers to the probability, right? So is the probability that the gap between the train error, so I'll just call this train E of H, minus test E of H, right? This quantity is less than or equal to epsilon. So the probability that this is true is 1 minus delta. Okay. So given delta small enough, right? So with high probability that given delta small enough and epsilon small enough, this is the bound. So m is greater than or equal to log h plus log 1 over delta divided by 2 epsilon square. So this is actually very similar to what we saw earlier, with only one difference, that here we actually had only epsilon, right? Now because we have used the Chernoff bound, the bound becomes a little bit looser, unfortunately, and we have a 2 epsilon square. So the dependence of 1 over epsilon becomes 1 over epsilon square. So the bound becomes a bit worse, but at least this generalizes, right? So we don't need to make the assumption anymore that the training error is 0. Even the training error is not 0, the gap between the training error and the test error being actually, so I think I can get rid of the, I can directly write it in this way, right? So the test error of H minus the train error of H, right? So train error will typically be smaller. So the test error is not too much off from the training error. The probability that this is less than or equal to epsilon is 1 minus delta, and this is the minimum number of samples required to achieve this. Okay, so this is another form of a bound. Okay, so what this bound says, so here we have a sample complexity bound, right? So this is a sample complexity bound. Now what this bound says is that can we give a bound on the true error? So this is a true error. So given m, that is a number of samples, right? And given an epsilon h train, which is a training error, what is the generalization bound on the true error? Right? So this is the generalization bound. So this is called generalization bound. So the generalization bound is that the true error is less than or equal to epsilon h train plus this quantity. How did we get this quantity? Can someone tell me how we got this quantity? How did we get this quantity from this expression? Any idea? So the way we got this quantity is that we try to, okay, so what we know is, yeah, the expression of epsilon, exactly. So we have epsilon h equal to epsilon h train, right, plus epsilon, okay. So essentially we have this bound of epsilon, we have m greater than equal to something like this, right? So now we can actually get a lower bound of epsilon with this quantity. So basically we can get epsilon, so we take epsilon on this side, right? And we get something like this. We get that epsilon is actually greater than equal to, right, square root of 1 over m log of h plus log of 1 over delta, right? And this is exactly the term that we basically substitute over here. So we get this bound now that this term is essentially epsilon that we saw in the previous slide, right? So we take a square root. So this is epsilon h is bounded by epsilon h train. This is the training error plus square root of 1 over 2m multiplied by log size of h plus log delta. Okay, so this is the generalization bound, and now this is very intuitive, right? So this generalization bound can be split into two terms. The first term is called the bias, okay, which is epsilon h train, which is a training error, okay, and the second term is also called the variance. So variance is essentially a notion of the complexity of the hypothesis space. Okay. So one way to measure complexity is through the size of H, right? Another notion of the complexity is by number of training examples. Okay, so I'll describe some of this briefly. So if H is small, then the variance is low, right? The variance is low because you have log of H. So you have log of h, so the second term is very low, right? But unfortunately, because you have a very small set of hypothesis functions, your bias will be very high, right? So what it means by the bias being very high is that the training error will be very large, right? Because you will underfit. So this phenomena is basically underfitting, or this is called a high bias, right? So this basically is also known as the bias variance trade-off. Okay. So bias variance trade-off can be seen in multiple ways. It's also there from a probabilistic kind of Bayesian perspective, but it is also there from the packed bounds. Packed bounds also naturally have this bias variance trade-off. Okay. So if you have small h, then you will typically have a high bias, and you'll have a low variance, right? Conversely, if you have a large h, right, there are lots of good hypotheses, so your bias is low, but there is a larger chance of overfitting. Okay, so this is the probability of overfitting. So essentially, what this means is that this is more complex hypothesis space. Okay. And this is relatively simple hypothesis. So we have a low bias because there are lots of good hypotheses, but then there is a high variance because we are overfitting. So this is exactly why we want to have this trade-off between bias and variance. And we want to exactly understand the effect of overfitting versus underfitting.